I bet this little girl couldn't even spell algorithm if I spotted her in the first 5 letters. CEO Richard Blackstone's voice booms across the server room as he grabs 4-year-old Maya Johnson by the shoulder and physically pushes her away from a computer terminal. 10 PhD engineers watch in stunned silence as their boss towers over the black teenager. This is a $50 million server room, not a daycare center. He towers over Maya Johnson, who clutches a worn programming book against her chest. Get this child out before she breaks something important. Security guards approach as the CEO literally shoves a teenager toward the door while news cameras wait outside. Behind them, red error messages cascade across every screen in the room. The system that handles $2 billion in daily transactions is collapsing, and it's getting worse by the minute. Have you ever watched a room full of adults dismiss a child's intelligence simply because of their age and background? 3 hours earlier, Maya Johnson had arrived at Technova Corporation with her mother Patricia, the night janitor. While her mom cleaned executive offices, Maya did homework in empty conference rooms, surrounded by discarded computer manuals she'd rescued from trash bins. For 2 years, this had been their routine. Patricia worked double shifts to keep food on the table after Maya's father died. Maya taught herself programming from those thrown-away manuals, building computers from spare parts employees left behind. But tonight was different. Tonight, Technova's entire future hung in the balance. The company's automated trading system had crashed at 6 p.m., taking down financial networks across the country. Every minute of downtime costs $50,000 in penalties and compensation. 200 financial institutions were screaming for answers. Richard Blackstone built Technova on one simple belief: elite problems require elite minds. His engineering team consisted of 10 PhD graduates from Stanford, MIT, and Harvard. Each earned over $300,000 annually. Richard paid top dollar because he believed expensive education guaranteed superior intelligence. Complex systems demand sophisticated thinking, he often told investors. You can't debug enterprise software with YouTube tutorials. The irony was lost on him that Maya had been quietly observing their sophisticated system for months. During late-night homework sessions in the server room, she'd noticed patterns the expensive engineers missed. Error cycles that repeated every Tuesday at exactly 3:47 p.m. Memory spikes that coincided with automated processes. Warning signs that pointed to deeper architectural problems. But when Patricia mentioned her daughter's computer knowledge, Richard dismissed it instantly. Ma'am, children play video games. We engineer solutions that move billions of dollars. Now those billions were at risk. Stock prices had plummeted 40% in 3 hours. Federal banking regulators were flying in from Washington. Emergency board meetings were being called. Local news crews gathered outside, sensing a major corporate disaster. The engineering team had tried everything. They'd rolled back software versions, restarted servers, implemented emergency patches, and called in external consultants. Nothing worked. The system kept crashing with the same cryptic error messages. Richard paced the server room like a caged animal, his Harvard MBA suddenly feeling worthless. Every few minutes, his assistant whispered updates about angry phone calls from major clients. Pension funds threatened to pull their accounts. Investment firms demanded explanations he couldn't provide. How can 10 PhDs not solve this? He muttered to Dr. Stevens, his lead engineer. Dr. Stevens wiped sweat from his forehead. The error logs don't make sense. It's like the system is fighting itself. Through the glass door, Maya watched the chaos unfold. She recognized the symptoms immediately. The memory allocation patterns, the cascading failures, the timing of each crash. It all pointed to a fundamental flaw in how their backup system interacted with peak trading loads. But she was just the janitor's daughter, a 14-year-old black girl with no credentials, no degree, no expensive education to validate her observations. In Richard's world, her insights meant nothing. The stakes kept climbing. $9 million lost and counting. Federal investigators arriving within hours. 50,000 people watched the live financial news coverage, waiting to see if Technova would survive the night. Richard's phone buzzed with another angry investor. Fix this now, or we're pulling our funding. He hung up and turned to his team with desperation creeping into his voice. I don't care what it costs. Get this system working. But money couldn't buy the solution they needed. The answer sat quietly in the hallway, clutching a programming book, invisible to the very people who needed her most. Maya knew exactly what was wrong. She'd seen this exact failure pattern in the open-source database systems she'd studied. The fix would take 5 minutes and 1 line of code. But first, she'd have to convince a room full of adults to listen to a child they'd already dismissed. The question hanging in the air wasn't whether Maya could solve their problem. The question was whether their prejudice would cost them everything. What happens when the solution to your billion-dollar crisis is sitting right in front of you, but you're too proud to see it? By 9 p.m., the engineering team's confidence had crumbled. Dr. Stevens stared at his screen, watching the same error messages cycle endlessly. 6 hours of failed attempts had left him questioning everything he thought he knew about database architecture. "We've tried every standard protocol," he announced to the room. "Full system rollbacks, memory optimization, connection pool adjustments, nothing's working." Richard's face had turned ashen. The financial news networks were already calling it Technova's billion-dollar meltdown. His phone buzzed constantly with board members demanding answers he didn't have. That's when Patricia Johnson appeared in the doorway, still holding her cleaning supplies. "Mr. Blackstone, sir? I'm sorry to interrupt, but my daughter has been watching your computers act up for weeks. She might—" "Your daughter?" Richard's voice cracked with disbelief. "Ma'am, this is enterprise-level infrastructure. We have 10 PhDs working on this crisis. A child cannot possibly understand systems this complex." "Doctor." Stevens looked up from his screen. "With respect, Mr. Blackstone, we're running out of options. Maybe fresh eyes could—" "Fresh eyes?" Richard's voice rose to a near shout. "She's 14 years old. This isn't a school science project. We're talking about $2 billion in daily transactions." But Maya had already slipped into the room. She stood quietly beside her mother, watching the screens that displayed familiar error patterns. The cascading failures, the memory spikes, the precise timing of each crash. It was exactly what she'd predicted would happen. "The backup system is colliding with peak memory usage," she said softly. The room fell silent. 10 PhD engineers turned to stare at the teenager who just diagnosed their crisis in one sentence. Richard's face flushed red. "Security! Get this child out of here before she touches something and makes everything worse." "But doctor," Stevens held up his hand. "Wait, what did you just say about backup collision?" Maya's voice was steady despite the hostile stares. "Your automated backup process starts every 3 days at 3:45 p.m., but it only checks total memory availability, not active memory usage. When trading volume spikes, you hit 95% active processes. The backup triggers anyway, pushing memory to 103%, and everything crashes." "Doctor." Stevens frantically pulled up the backup scheduler logs. His eyes widened as he traced the timestamps. The crashes. They're exactly 5 minutes after backup initiation. Every single time. "That's impossible," Richard snapped. "Our backup system has built-in safeguards. It's designed by professionals." Maya stepped closer to the nearest terminal. "The safeguard checks for 80% total memory, but it doesn't account for process allocation overhead during peak trading windows." The room erupted in whispers. Half the engineers were pulling up backup logs, comparing timestamps with crash reports. The correlation was undeniable. Richard felt his authority slipping away. A 14-year-old girl had identified the pattern that 10 expensive PhD engineers had missed. The solution to their billion-dollar crisis might be sitting right in front of them, spoken by someone he'd dismissed as irrelevant. Federal investigators would arrive in 3 hours. The board of directors was convening an emergency session. Financial news networks were broadcasting their failure to the world, and the only person who seemed to understand their problem was a child he'd tried to kick out of the building. Maya looked directly at Richard, her voice calm but determined. "I can fix this if you let me try." The question that would define Technova's future hung in the air. Would Richard's pride cost them everything, or would he swallow his prejudice and trust a 14-year-old to save his company? Richard stared at Maya for a long moment, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and desperation. Around him, his expensive engineering team was validating a 14-year-old's diagnosis. The humiliation burned, but the ticking clock of financial disaster burned worse. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "You have exactly 10 minutes to prove you're not just guessing. But when you fail, you're out of this building permanently." Maya nodded calmly and approached the nearest terminal. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising confidence as she pulled up the system architecture diagrams. The room watched in tense silence. "Your backup process is scheduled here," she said, highlighting a configuration file. "It's set to trigger when total system memory drops below 80% availability. But look at this." She opened a second window showing real-time memory allocation patterns. "During peak trading hours, your active processes consume 85% of memory, but the system reports only 75% total usage because of how it calculates free space. The backup scheduler sees 75% and thinks it's safe to start." Dr. Stevens leaned closer to the screen. "But our memory monitoring should account for active processes." "It does," Maya replied, pulling up another configuration screen. "But only for user-initiated processes. Your backup system bypasses the memory counter. When it starts copying data, it creates a memory spike that pushes total usage over the limit." She pointed to the backup scheduler settings. "The system checks if memory is below 80% before starting backup, but it only sees basic memory usage. It doesn't see the extra 15% from active trading, and it doesn't account for the 20% spike the backup itself creates." The silence in the room was deafening. "Doctor," Stevens ran the calculation in his head, his face growing pale. "That would push memory usage to 120% during peak hours. The system would crash every time." "Exactly," Maya said. "And since your backup runs every 3 days, the crashes follow a predictable pattern: Tuesday, Friday, Sunday. Always at 3:52 p.m., exactly 7 minutes after backup starts." Richard's lead engineer frantically pulled up crash logs from the past month. The timestamps matched perfectly. Every system failure had occurred exactly when Maya predicted, following the backup schedule like clockwork. "This is impossible," Richard muttered. "Our system architects are from Stanford. They wouldn't make such an elementary mistake." Maya's voice remained respectful but firm. "It's not elementary when you're looking at it from inside the system. Sometimes you need an outside perspective to see the pattern." She modified one setting in the backup scheduler. Now it checks actual memory availability, not just basic allocation. It accounts for trading activity and backup overhead before starting the process. Dr. Stevens stared at the fix. That's actually elegant. Why didn't we think of that?" "Because you were looking for complex solutions to what appeared to be a complex problem," Maya replied. "Sometimes the fix is simpler than you expect." She executed the code change and restarted the backup scheduler. Immediately, the error messages stopped cascading across the screens. System memory stabilized at 78%. Transaction processing resumed normal speed. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Federal banking regulators, who had just arrived and were watching from the doorway, exchanged surprised glances. The lead investigator stepped forward. "Young lady, did you just fix a multi-billion-dollar system failure with one line of code?" Maya nodded. "The underlying architecture is sound. It just needed a more accurate memory check before triggering automated processes." Richard's face had gone from red to white to green. The solution to their crisis had come from the child he'd physically removed from the room hours earlier. His expensive team of PhD engineers watched as their fundamental assumptions about intelligence and expertise crumbled. Dr. Stevens approached Maya with genuine respect. "How did you see this pattern when we couldn't?" "I've been watching the system behavior during my homework time for months," Maya explained. "When you're not under pressure to find a solution immediately, you notice things differently. The crashes always happened on the same days, at the same times. That suggested a scheduled process was involved." One of the junior engineers spoke up. "We should have caught this during our stress testing phase." "You probably did," Maya replied. "But you were testing during off-peak hours when memory usage was lower. The backup collision only happens during high-volume trading periods." The financial news networks, monitoring the situation live, began reporting that Technova's system was stabilizing. Stock prices stopped their freefall. The 50,000 viewers watching the live stream saw real-time graphs showing transaction speeds returning to normal. But Richard wasn't celebrating. The humiliation of being solved by a teenager was crushing his ego. "Lucky guess," he said loudly. "Anyone can spot an obvious configuration error once it's pointed out." The room fell silent again. Maya looked directly at him, her 14-year-old voice carrying unexpected authority. Mr. Blackstone, this wasn't luck. Your backup collision was the surface symptom of a deeper architectural problem. When trading volume increases Monday morning, you're going to hit another bottleneck that your team hasn't identified yet. Dr. Stevens' eyes widened. What kind of bottleneck? Maya glanced at the system diagram still displayed on the screens. Your database concurrency model can't handle more than 50,000 simultaneous transactions. Monday's peak volume will hit 75,000. Without restructuring your connection pooling, the entire system will lock up again. The room seemed to hold its breath. Maya had just predicted another crisis that none of the experts had foreseen. How many more problems was this child seeing that they had missed? And would Richard's pride prevent him from listening before it was too late? Dr. Sarah Carter arrived at Technova just as Maya finished explaining her database prediction. The emergency systems consultant had been called in by federal regulators, but she walked into a scene she'd never expected. A 14-year-old girl teaching PhD engineers about system architecture. "I'm Dr. Carter from the Federal Reserve's Technology Oversight Division," she announced, studying the room. "Someone wants to explain why our crisis monitoring shows this system stabilized in the last 20 minutes. Richard straightened his tie, trying to regain authority. "Our engineering team identified and resolved a backup scheduling conflict. The situation is under control, Doctor." Carter's eyes moved to Maya, who was still standing at the terminal. "And who is this?" "The janitor's daughter," Richard said dismissively. "She got lucky spotting an obvious configuration error." But Dr. Carter had been debugging enterprise systems for 20 years. She recognized genuine expertise when she saw it. "Young lady, what's your assessment of this system's stability?" Maya looked uncertain for a moment, glancing at her mother, then back at Dr. Carter. "The backup fix will hold through the weekend. But Monday morning, when trading volume returns to peak levels, there's going to be a bigger problem." "What kind of bigger problem?" "What kind of bigger problem?" "The database architecture can't handle concurrent read and write operations above 50,000 transactions per second. Monday's opening bell typically generates 75,000 transactions in the first hour alone." Dr. Stevens laughed nervously. "That's impossible. Our stress testing showed the system handling 60,000 transactions without issues." Maya shook her head. "Your stress tests used simulated data with uniform distribution. Real trading creates uneven transaction clusters. When multiple large institutions try to execute similar trades simultaneously, you get transaction bottlenecks that your tests never accounted for." "Doctor?" Carter pulled up her tablet, checking federal banking data. "Monday's scheduled volume is actually projected at 78,000 transactions for the first hour. Multiple pension funds are executing quarterly rebalancing." The room went quiet. Maya's prediction was already being validated by official data. Richard felt his control slipping again. "Even if that's true, we have all weekend to optimize the system. My team has handled capacity issues before." "Have you handled database deadlock cascades?" Maya asked quietly. Dr. Stevens blinked. "Database deadlock what?" Maya moved to a whiteboard and began drawing simple diagrams. "When transaction volume hits your limit, the database starts queuing read and write operations. But your system prioritizes write operations over reads. So when large buy orders come in, they lock database tables while processing. If multiple large orders hit simultaneously, they create circular dependencies where each transaction is waiting for another to finish." She drew circles with arrows between them. "Transaction A locks table 1, needs table 2. Transaction B locks table 2, needs table 1. Neither can proceed, so they wait forever. Meanwhile, hundreds of smaller transactions pile up behind them, all waiting for the locked tables." Dr. Carter studied the diagram. "That would create a system-wide freeze." "Exactly. And once it starts, the only way to fix it is a complete database restart, which takes 45 minutes. During peak trading hours, that could cost." Dr. Stevens was already calculating. $800 million in failed transactions. The federal investigator who'd been quietly observing stepped forward. "Miss, how do you know all this?" Maya's voice was steady but humble. "I've been studying database systems in my free time. I've seen this exact problem in open-source projects I follow online. The solution exists, but it requires restructuring how the system handles concurrent operations." Richard's face was turning red again. "This is ridiculous. We're going to redesign our entire database architecture based on a teenager's theory? Dr. Carter held up her hand. Actually, Mr. Blackstone, the Federal Reserve requires stress testing under real-world conditions before we approve continued operations. If Miss Johnson's analysis is correct, your system could fail catastrophically during Monday's trading session. She turned to Maya. Can you demonstrate this potential failure using current system parameters? Maya nodded. I'd need to run a simulation with realistic transaction clustering patterns. Your current setup can show you exactly where the bottlenecks will occur. Absolutely not, Richard snapped. We're not risking system stability for a child's computer science project. But Dr. Carter's authority superseded Richard's. Mr. Blackstone, federal regulations require us to validate any identified systemic risks. If this young lady can predict system failure, we need to test her theory before Monday's markets open. The stakes had just escalated beyond Richard's company. This was now about protecting the entire financial sector from potential collapse. The Federal Reserve was taking Maya's warnings seriously, while Richard's own expertise was being questioned by government regulators. Dr. Stevens looked between Richard and Dr. Carter, realizing his career might depend on the next few decisions. What exactly would this simulation involve? Maya's response was measured and professional. We create a controlled test environment that mirrors Monday's expected trading patterns. If the system handles it smoothly, you're fine. If it fails like I predict, we have time to implement safeguards before real money is at risk. Dr. Carter nodded approvingly. That's exactly what federal protocol requires. Richard found himself backed into a corner by his own government regulators. The 14-year-old he'd dismissed was now being treated as a credible systems analyst by federal authorities. Would his pride allow him to accept help from the child he'd humiliated, or would he risk destroying not just his company, but potentially destabilizing financial markets across the country? Saturday morning brought an unprecedented scene to Technova's headquarters. Dr. Carter had mandated a head-to-head competition, the engineering team's traditional approach versus Maya's architectural solution. Both teams had until Sunday evening to prepare for Monday's federal stress test. The setup couldn't have been more unequal. In conference room A sat 10 PhD engineers with unlimited budget authorization. Richard had approved $500,000 for emergency consulting fees, premium development tools, and additional cloud servers. The team worked with multiple monitors, enterprise-grade software, and direct access to Technova's production environment. In the break room, Maya sat alone with a borrowed laptop, using free open-source tools and whatever internet connection she could access through the guest network. Security guards watched her suspiciously, as if a 14-year-old might somehow sabotage a billion-dollar company with a basic laptop. The disparity was intentional. Richard wanted to prove that expensive expertise trumped amateur theories. Dr. Stevens addressed his team with confidence. We're implementing distributed load balancing across multiple database clusters. When transaction volume spikes, we'll automatically route operations to less busy servers. Meanwhile, Maya was taking a completely different approach. She'd identified the root cause as poor connection pooling architecture. Instead of adding more servers, she was rewriting how the system managed database connections entirely. By Saturday afternoon, the first round of testing began. The engineering team's approach showed immediate promise. Their load balancing system smoothly distributed transactions across multiple servers, handling the projected 75,000 transactions per hour without apparent strain. Maya's single-server optimization seemed slower initially, processing transactions more deliberately rather than rushing through high volumes. See? Richard told Dr. Carter, pointing at the performance metrics. Professional solutions scale properly. Her amateur approach can't compete with real engineering. But Dr. Carter had seen enough enterprise failures to know that initial performance didn't guarantee stability. Let's increase the complexity. Add realistic transaction clustering patterns. This was where Maya's predictions started proving correct. When the engineering team's system faced clustered transactions, multiple large institutions executing similar trades simultaneously, cracks began showing. Server response times increased as the load balancer struggled to coordinate between multiple database clusters. Maya's approach maintained steady performance. Her redesigned connection pooling eliminated the bottlenecks that plagued distributed systems under uneven loads. Dr. Stevens frowned at his metrics. We need to optimize the inter-server communication protocols. By Saturday evening, social pressure was building from multiple directions. Outside Technova's headquarters, financial news crews had set up permanent stations. The story had evolved from a simple system crash to a David and Goliath narrative that captured public imagination. Social media buzzed with Team Maya hashtags as people followed the unprecedented competition between PhD engineers and a teenage girl. Inside the building, Richard fielded increasingly hostile calls from board members and major investors. Technova's stock had stabilized but remained volatile, dependent entirely on Monday's system performance. "Fix this, Richard," Board Chairman William Hayes demanded over speakerphone. "I don't care if you have to hire every computer expert in Silicon Valley. Our reputation is on the line." The irony wasn't lost on employees watching the drama unfold. The expert they needed was sitting in their break room, eating vending machine sandwiches and working on a laptop held together with duct tape. Sunday morning brought the next escalation. Dr. Carter increased the test parameters to mirror Monday's exact conditions. 78,000 transactions in the first hour, with realistic clustering patterns from actual pension fund trading algorithms. The engineering team's distributed system began showing serious strain. Database synchronization delays caused transaction conflicts. Their load balancer couldn't prevent bottlenecks when multiple servers tried accessing the same data simultaneously. Maya's architecture handled the increased load smoothly, processing transactions at a steady rate without performance degradation. But Richard wasn't ready to concede. Simulations don't reflect real-world variables. Production environments have complexities that lab tests can't replicate. That's when Maya made an unexpected request. "Dr. Carter, could I test my solution on a mirror of the actual production system, not the live environment, just an exact copy with real historical data?" Dr. Stevens scoffed. "Absolutely not. Production data requires security clearances and—" "I'll authorize it," Dr. Carter interrupted. "Federal oversight includes access to production systems for testing purposes." Richard's face went pale. Maya was about to work with real Technova data, the same systems his expensive team had designed and maintained. The production mirror test revealed something shocking. Maya's optimization didn't just prevent the predicted Monday crisis, it improved overall system performance by 40%. Transaction processing speeds increased dramatically while using fewer computational resources. More embarrassing for Richard, Maya identified 12 existing inefficiencies in the current production system. Minor configuration issues that had been draining performance for months without anyone noticing. "How did she find problems we've lived with for months?" Dr. Stevens whispered to his team. Maya's answer was simple. "When you're not emotionally attached to code," you wrote, "it's easier to see where it can improve." By Sunday afternoon, the engineering team was openly questioning their own approach. 3 junior engineers quietly asked Maya if they could observe her optimization techniques. Richard watched his authority crumble in real time. The team he'd assembled and paid premium salaries was seeking guidance from a teenager he'd tried to exclude from the building. The human moment came when Maya's mother arrived with dinner. Patricia Johnson found her daughter surrounded by computer printouts, working intently on problems that had stumped graduate-level engineers. "Baby, you don't have to prove anything to these people," Patricia said softly. Maya looked up from her laptop. "I'm not doing this for them, Mama. If this system fails Monday, ordinary people lose their retirement savings. That's not about proving anyone wrong. That's about doing what's right." The weight of responsibility was clear. This wasn't just a competition anymore. Real people's financial security depended on getting Monday morning right. Dr. Carter observed this exchange and realized something profound. Maya wasn't motivated by ego or recognition. She was driven by genuine concern for systemic stability and its impact on regular people. Sunday evening brought the final test results. Under maximum stress conditions, 85,000 transactions per hour with worst-case clustering patterns, the engineering team's solution failed catastrophically. The system locked up exactly as Maya had predicted, requiring a complete restart to restore functionality. Maya's architecture handled the extreme load without any degradation, processing transactions steadily and maintaining system stability throughout the stress test. The room fell silent as Dr. Carter announced the results to both teams. Richard stared at the performance metrics that proved everything he believed about intelligence, education, and expertise was wrong. A 14-year-old girl working alone had outperformed his entire team of PhD engineers using nothing but free software and borrowed equipment. The question now wasn't whether Maya could solve their problem. The question was whether Richard's pride would allow him to implement her solution before Monday's markets opened with real money at stake. Doctor. Carter stared at her tablet screen, scrolling through background verification data she'd requested on Maya Johnson. What she found made her call an immediate meeting with Richard and the federal investigation team. Before we proceed with Monday's implementation, there's something everyone needs to know about Maya's qualifications, Dr. Carter announced to the assembled group. Richard rolled his eyes. What qualifications? She's 14 years old. Dr. Carter turned her tablet toward the room, displaying a detailed analysis. Maya has been contributing to open-source database projects under the username Database Optimizer for the past 18 months. Her code modifications have been downloaded and implemented by over 800 companies worldwide. The room went silent. That's impossible, Dr. Stevens whispered. Doctor. Carter continued reading from the verification report. 47 accepted patches to PostgreSQL's core engine. 23 performance optimizations for Apache Kafka that improved processing speeds by an average of 35%. Database efficiency improvements that are currently running on systems at Amazon, Microsoft, Google, and Facebook. Richard's face had gone completely white. You're saying that major tech companies have been unknowingly using a child's code? Not unknowingly, knowingly and gratefully. Her contributions consistently solved problems that senior engineers at those companies couldn't crack. The open-source community considers Database Optimizer one of the most skilled contributors in the field. Maya shifted uncomfortably as all eyes turned to her. I used my mom's work computer during night shifts to contribute anonymously. I was afraid no one would take a 14-year-old seriously. Dr. Carter pulled up more data. Maya's optimization algorithms are currently processing financial transactions for 60% of major U.S. banks. Her connection pooling improvements handle over 4 billion database queries daily across multiple industries. The federal investigator stepped forward. Ms. Johnson, are you telling us that you've been solving enterprise-level database problems for Fortune 500 companies without anyone knowing your age or background? Maya nodded quietly. I just submitted solutions when I saw problems that needed fixing. The code worked, so people used it. Richard slumped into a chair, the full weight of his humiliation crashing down. For 18 months, his industry had been benefiting from the genius of a black teenager whose existence he'd dismissed. The very database optimizations keeping Technova competitive were likely based on Maya's foundational work. Dr. Stevens stared at his own system architecture diagrams. Our performance improvements over the past year, they came from open-source updates we downloaded. That included Maya's optimizations, Dr. Carter confirmed. Your system's current stability is partially built on her code. The foundation of everything Richard believed about intelligence, credentials, and expertise had just cracked. This wasn't a lucky amateur spotting an obvious problem. This was a proven master of database architecture who'd been anonymously supporting the entire tech industry. Maya's voice cut through the shocked silence. The real problem isn't Monday's transaction volume. Someone has been deliberately introducing inefficiencies into your system. The issues I've been fixing aren't accidents. What kind of deliberate sabotage had they missed while dismissing their own savior? Monday morning, 6 a.m. Despite all evidence pointing to Maya's superior solution, Richard made his final executive decision. Standing before the federal oversight team, he declared, "We're implementing our engineering team's distributed load balancing system. Professional expertise built this company, and professional expertise will save it." Dr. Carter protested immediately. Mr. Blackstone, the stress tests clearly showed. Stress tests are simulations, Richard interrupted, his voice tight with desperation. This is a real-world application. I won't bet Technova's future on amateur theories. Regardless of her anonymous contributions to open-source projects. Maya watched from the hallway as technicians began implementing the engineering team's solution. Her optimized architecture was abandoned, replaced by the distributed system that had failed every stress test. At 8:30 a.m., 30 minutes before market opening, the first warning signs appeared. Transaction processing slowed as the load balancing system struggled to coordinate between multiple database clusters. Dr. Stevens frantically adjusted server allocation parameters, trying to optimize performance in real time. "Everything's within normal parameters," he reported to Richard. "We're ready for the market opening." But Maya could see the dangerous building. Database connection pools were already approaching critical thresholds. When the opening bell triggered massive transaction volumes, the system would collapse exactly as she'd predicted. At 9 a.m., the New York Stock Exchange opened. For the first 20 minutes, everything seemed manageable. Transaction volumes remained below peak levels as markets gradually warmed up. Richard stood before the assembled news crews, his confidence restored. "Technova's professional engineering team has successfully resolved our technical challenges," he announced to the cameras. "This demonstrates why complex problems require sophisticated expertise, not amateur speculation." Maya felt her stomach sink as she watched her mother clean around the chaos, invisible to everyone celebrating their apparent success. At 9:23 a.m., the quarterly pension fund rebalancing began. Massive institutional orders flooded the system simultaneously. 15 different pension funds executed similar trades within a 3-minute window, creating exactly the transaction clustering Maya had warned about. The distributed load balancer began failing immediately. Database conflicts cascaded across multiple servers as the system tried to process competing large transactions. Connection pools overflowed, transaction queues backed up exponentially. Error messages multiplied faster than technicians could read them. By 9:30 a.m., the entire system was locked in deadlock cascades. 200 financial institutions went offline simultaneously. Pension funds couldn't execute trades. Individual investors watched helplessly as their orders hung in processing limbo. The financial news networks switched to emergency coverage as Technova's catastrophic failure spread across the market. $12 billion in transaction volume frozen, a CNBC reporter announced live. This represents the largest financial technology failure in U.S. history. Richard's face went from confident to panicked to devastated in the span of 7 minutes. Everything Maya had predicted was happening in real time, broadcast live to millions of viewers, but the worst was yet to come. As federal investigators scrambled to assess the damage, Richard made one final desperate decision. He turned to the news cameras and threw Maya under the bus completely. "This failure occurred because we allowed unauthorized personnel to interfere with our production systems," he declared, his voice shaking. "A 14-year-old child with no formal training manipulated our architecture, causing this catastrophic breakdown." The lie was breathtaking in its audacity and cruelty. Maya stood in the hallway, watching Richard blame her for implementing the exact opposite of her recommendations. The man who had ignored her warnings, dismissed her expertise, and chosen a solution that failed precisely as she predicted was now destroying her reputation to save his own. Security guards approached Maya and her mother. "Mr. Blackstone wants you both removed from the premises immediately." News cameras caught the footage of Patricia and Maya Johnson being escorted from Technova headquarters while financial markets collapsed around them. The visual became instant viral content, a black mother and daughter blamed for a crisis created by the very people who had refused their help. Maya's reputation was being systematically destroyed on live television, while the real solution sat unused on her borrowed laptop. That evening, sitting in their small apartment, Maya stared at news coverage, showing her face alongside headlines like "Teen Hacker Crashes Financial Markets" and "Child's Computer Games Cost Billions." She turned to her mother with tears in her eyes. "Maybe I should just give up on computers, Mama. Maybe I'm really not smart enough for this world." Patricia held her daughter close, watching the injustice unfold on every news channel. But in her purse, Patricia's phone was buzzing with an incoming call from Dr. Carter. The federal investigator had been analyzing the failure data, and she'd discovered something that would change everything. Could the truth emerge before Maya's spirit was completely broken by a system designed to crush young black brilliance? At 11:47 p.m. Monday night, Maya's phone rang. "Doctor," Carter's voice was urgent and apologetic. "Maya, I need you back at Technova immediately. I've been analyzing the failure data, and Richard lied about everything. The system crashed exactly as you predicted, using exactly the solution you warned against. Can you come in tonight?" Maya looked at her mother, exhaustion written across both their faces. Doctor, Carter, everyone thinks I caused this. Why would I? Because $12 billion in transactions are still frozen, and you're the only person who can fix it. The engineering team has been trying for 14 hours. They've made it worse. Patricia Johnson squeezed her daughter's hand. Baby, you don't owe these people anything. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then, but I owe something to all the people whose retirement money is trapped in that system. They arrived at Technova to find chaos. Federal investigators filled the building. The engineering team looked defeated and exhausted. Richard sat in his office, fielding angry calls from board members demanding his resignation. Dr. Carter escorted Maya through a gauntlet of news cameras, federal agents, and curious employees who'd been called in for the emergency. The main conference room had been converted into a crisis command center, with live feeds to federal banking regulators and real-time financial news coverage. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Carter announced to the room of 50 officials and investigators. Maya Johnson is here to attempt system recovery. I want everyone to understand. The failure analysis shows the system crashed, using the distributed architecture that explicitly ignored her recommendations. Richard burst into the room, his face flushed with panic and rage. This is insane. You're letting the person who caused this disaster touch our systems again? Mr. Blackstone, the lead federal investigator, stepped forward. Our forensic analysis proves conclusively that Miss Johnson's architecture was never implemented. The system failed using your engineering team's solution, exactly as she predicted it would. The room fell silent. Maya looked directly at Richard, her 14-year-old voice carrying unexpected authority. Mr. Blackstone, I understand you need someone to blame for this. But while you've been protecting your reputation, real people's money has been frozen for 16 hours. I can fix this if you stop interfering. Maya approached the main terminal as dozens of officials watched. The screens showed a nightmare of database deadlocks, frozen transactions, and cascading system failures that had stumped 10 PhD engineers for an entire day. First, I need to understand the current damage state, Maya said, her fingers moving confidently across the keyboard. She pulled up system diagnostics that revealed the full scope of the catastrophe. The distributed load balancer created circular dependencies between database clusters. Server A locked data that Server B needs, while Server B locked data that Server A needs. Neither can proceed, and every new transaction just adds to the deadlock queue. Dr. Stevens, looking utterly defeated, spoke up. We've tried breaking the locks manually, but it causes data corruption. We've tried rolling back to previous states, but the transaction logs are too large to process. Maya nodded sympathetically. Those approaches would work for simple deadlocks, but you're dealing with cascading inter-server dependencies. You can't fix it by attacking individual locks. You have to restructure how the system manages concurrent access entirely. She began working with methodical precision, her approach displayed on large monitors for everyone to see. Step 1. Isolate the deadlocked clusters without breaking existing locks. This prevents new deadlocks while preserving data integrity for transactions already in progress. Her fingers moved rapidly, implementing connection pool modifications that allowed frozen transactions to maintain their state while new ones followed different pathways. Step 2. Implement priority-based transaction processing. High-value transactions get dedicated database connections, preventing them from competing with smaller operations. The room watched in fascination as Maya essentially rebuilt the system's transaction architecture in real time, working around the failures without losing any data. Step 3. Gradually resolve existing deadlocks by processing them in dependency order. Server A releases locks for Server B first, allowing B's transactions to complete, which frees resources for A. Federal investigators murmured among themselves as they watched a 14-year-old systematically solve problems that had defeated experienced professionals for 16 hours. How is she doing this? Whispered a banking regulator. Doctor, Carter answered, she's implementing the architecture she originally recommended, the one Mr. Blackstone rejected. After 2 hours of live debugging, Maya initiated the recovery sequence. Frozen transactions began processing in controlled batches. Database connections stabilized. Error messages disappeared from monitoring screens. At 2:15 a.m. Tuesday morning, the system came fully online. $12 billion in frozen transactions processed successfully. Account balances updated correctly. No data was lost. The nightmare was over. The room erupted in applause from federal officials who had witnessed an unprecedented display of technical mastery. But Maya wasn't finished. She turned to address the room with quiet confidence. This failure wasn't just about ignoring better architecture. Mr. Blackstone, your system has been deliberately sabotaged. Someone has been introducing inefficiencies and backdoors for months. She displayed forensic evidence she'd discovered during the recovery. These modifications were designed to create failures during high-stress periods. Someone wanted your company to crash at the worst possible moment. Dr. Stevens looked at the evidence, his face going pale. Those code changes, they were submitted by David Carter, our senior architect. He told us they were performance optimizations. Maya continued her analysis. David has been selling your proprietary algorithms to competitors while weakening your system's stability. Today's crash was meant to destroy Technova's reputation and tank the stock price. He probably has short positions that profit from your failure. Security immediately detained David Carter, who had been conspicuously absent during the crisis. His arrest would later reveal a complex insider trading scheme worth millions of dollars. The federal investigator addressed the room. Miss Johnson has not only saved $12 billion in frozen assets, she's exposed systematic corporate fraud that could have destroyed multiple financial institutions. Richard stood in the corner, watching his worldview collapse completely. The child he'd dismissed and publicly humiliated had just saved his company, exposed a criminal conspiracy, and demonstrated technical abilities that exceeded his entire engineering team combined. Doctor? Carter turned to the news cameras that had been recording everything. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just witnessed one of the most remarkable displays of technical expertise in financial technology history, performed by a 14-year-old who was blamed for a crisis she predicted and prevented. Maya looked directly at Richard, her voice calm but powerful. Intelligence doesn't come from expensive degrees or prestigious backgrounds, Mr. Blackstone. It comes from seeing patterns, thinking clearly, and caring enough about other people to do the right thing. The status flip was complete. The girl Richard had physically removed from the building was now being hailed as a national hero by federal authorities. Would Richard finally acknowledge the genius he'd tried so hard to destroy? As dawn broke over Technova headquarters, Dr. Carter made an announcement that no one saw coming. Maya, the federal investigation uncovered something else. Technova's core system architecture was built on stolen intellectual property. Your intellectual property. The room fell silent. David Carter discovered Maya's anonymous GitHub contributions 2 years ago and reverse-engineered them into Technova's proprietary systems. No attribution, no compensation. Your company's billion-dollar foundation was built on code stolen from a 12-year-old girl. Richard's face went completely white. That's impossible. The evidence is conclusive, Mr. Blackstone. The Federal Trade Commission will be investigating this as systematic IP theft. Maya stared at the screen, pieces clicking together. That's why David sabotaged the system. He knew I might recognize my own algorithms. The board chairman's voice boomed through the conference speakers. Richard, did we build this company on stolen code? Richard couldn't speak. His entire empire was built on the genius of the child he'd dismissed. Dr. Carter continued. The board has authorized an immediate settlement. Full recognition as Technova's original architect, $50 million in retroactive licensing fees, and an offer for the Chief Technology Officer position. The number hit like lightning. $50 million for work Maya had done anonymously at age 12. Additionally, Technova will fund the Maya Johnson Foundation with $100 million to support underrepresented students in STEM. Richard's voice came out broken. Maya, I owe you everything. The cameras captured the perfect moment. The man who mocked a cleaning girl's intelligence now acknowledging she owned his company's intellectual foundation. But justice wasn't done. The federal investigator stepped forward. Mr. Blackstone, given the systematic fraud discovered, the board has voted to terminate your employment immediately. The reversal was complete. Richard Blackstone, powerful CEO who dismissed a child's intelligence, was now unemployed, while that child was offered his company's highest position. Maya looked at him with wisdom beyond her years. I didn't do this for recognition, Mr. Blackstone. When you can solve problems that help people, you have a responsibility to try. How had everything changed so completely? 6 months later, Maya Johnson stands before a packed auditorium at Stanford University, delivering the keynote address at the National Technology Innovation Summit. The same institution whose graduates once dismissed her now honors her as the youngest keynote speaker in their history. When I was 12 years old, I wrote my first database optimization algorithm sitting in my mother's workplace break room. Maya begins, her voice carrying new confidence. I never imagined that code would one day power systems handling billions of dollars in transactions across hundreds of companies. The audience includes technology leaders, federal officials, and students from around the world. In the front row sits Patricia Johnson, wearing the proud smile of a mother whose faith never wavered. 6 months ago, a CEO threw me out of a server room because he couldn't imagine that intelligence might come in an unexpected package. Today, that same company is thriving under the architecture I designed when I was 14. Technova's stock price has tripled under Maya's technical leadership. Her optimization algorithms now power financial systems across 12 countries. The Maya Johnson Foundation has awarded scholarships to over 2,000 underrepresented students pursuing STEM education. But this story isn't really about me, Maya continues. It's about recognizing that brilliance exists everywhere, in break rooms and hallways, in children who ask different questions, in people whose circumstances don't match your expectations of what genius looks like. Richard Blackstone watches the live stream from his small apartment, where he works as a junior analyst at a mid-sized consulting firm. The humiliation still burns, but he's learned to see Maya's success as a lesson rather than a defeat. Every day, remarkable minds are overlooked because they don't fit traditional patterns. Young people are dismissed because of their age. Talented individuals are ignored because of their background. Brilliant solutions rejected because they come from unexpected sources. Maya's voice grows stronger, carrying the wisdom earned through her journey from invisible to indispensable. How many problems remain unsolved because the people with answers are sitting in the back of the room? How many innovations are waiting in the minds of those that society overlooks? She pauses, looking directly into the camera that's broadcasting to millions worldwide. If this story inspired you, look around. Notice the quiet brilliance in unexpected places. Listen to voices that others dismiss. Support young people who see the world differently. The standing ovation lasts 3 minutes. Challenge your assumptions about intelligence. Question your biases about capability. And remember, the next breakthrough might come from someone you'd never think to ask. Because genius doesn't announce itself with credentials. It whispers solutions in break rooms, after hours, when nobody's watching. Your job is to listen. Maya smiles, her 14-year-old face radiating hope and determination. What hidden genius will you discover today?
At Black Voices Uncut, we don't polish away the pain or water down the message. We tell it like it is because the truth deserves nothing less. If today's story spoke to you, click like, join the conversation in the comments, and subscribe so you'll be here for the next Uncut Voice.